2 billion and counting. I believe I'm the most watched multilingual face online.
Well, today we have Gabriella White. So I have here on your card, Gabrielle, and thank you first of all for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, when I looked at your card, I see that you speak English, French, German, Dutch, Flemish. You're an author, you're an editor, you're an international journalist, a broadcaster, PR manager?
Yes.
No, PR manager?
Yes, I have.
Manager,
Yes.
and you're a speech coach, you do languages, linguistics. Oh, what is it that you don't do? That is fantastic.
Skydiving.
That's really wonderful. Now, you've told me just before we started the podcast that you're the only child
I am, yes.
in your family.
Yes.
Where were you born?
I was born in County Durham in northeast England to a Dutch mother and a British father.
Right. And you did mention that your father's not here now. He's not
That's
with us
right,
any
yes,
longer.
he passed away recently, so but he's very much with me. I have every faith in that. Yeah.
I'm sorry to
We
hear
were
that.
super close. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
And similar as well.
Is that right? Your mom and dad stayed together the whole
Oh
time?
yes, very loyal relationship. Yes.
How's your mother doing now?
She's a tough cookie, my mother. She really is. She has that Dutch feist, I think. Yes. Yes, that
That's
tough
why
love.
it's her side of the family where you get your height?
Do you know, a lot of people ask me that. Actually, I think it's the British side. Yes, my dad was very tall. My uncle is also very tall. My mum's a lot shorter than I am. But my Dutch cousins tower over me.
I've seen so many people from Holland that are just... My son and I went there.
Right.
It was, I think, just before COVID. We went there on a trip. And I remember walking there and for the first time in decades feeling like a itty bitty person.
But you're very tall as well, aren't you?
I'm just 6 feet. But I mean,
Yeah.
it seemed like the women all there were 6 and above.
Yes.
And the guys were towering over them.
Yes.
And I'm talking in a perfect proportion.
Yeah.
It's not like as if they looked like their torso was higher, longer than their legs or whatever. They had a good proportion.
Yes.
It's interesting. So you believe you got most of yours from your English side?
Yeah, probably a bit of both, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But yes, yeah.
So as a little girl, were you more academic or were you more physical?
Oh gosh, I was always academic. I studied a lot. I was very conscientious about my studies. I would say a born perfectionist, which is something I've learned to tone down over the years. I think to my benefit, because I was too much of a perfectionist growing up, for sure.
Do your parents read to you a lot when you were young?
I was always, I was very, very blessed. I had an abundance of books. They always showered me with books as gifts. And we really have a very large library back in the UK, and I've kind of continued to build that in Tokyo kind of naturally.
What type of books did you gravitate towards most?
Well, these days more spiritual reading, always self-development books.
Well, when you were a kid, you weren't doing self-development books when you were a little kid.
What was I reading? Just
Right.
the standard stuff, you know, like Alice in Wonderland. It was always the adventurer kind of books, and that was always very much a part of me.
So you saw yourself as Alice in Wonderland at times?
Well, not necessarily. Maybe now, actually.
Okay. What was some of your favorite literature that you liked as a kid?
Yeah, a lot of Lewis Carroll, I have to say. A lot of Lewis Carroll. A lot of Dutch books as well.
So you started reading. Wait. So, give me a little bit about your growing up. Did your parents speak to you in only one language?
No, actually, it was fantastic. I was brought up bilingually, which at the time I thought was kind of weird and awkward, kind of going to school. My mum would walk me to school and she would always speak to me in Dutch, and she would insist that until we got to the school gates we would be speaking Dutch. But growing up in a small village, people would overhear conversations, so I was always a little bit different, a bit of a mystery to people. So it was very interesting, you know, rural England. So
Mother and father, would they speak?
Mainly English, but my dad was a fantastic linguist, so he actually loved throwing himself into Dutch. My parents met in the Netherlands. My dad was doing business over there, and they met by pure coincidence. My mum was not in this place very often, but she happened to be there, and it was just magic. It's a very magical love story between them. Yeah. My mum speaks a little bit of German, I mean, it being quite similar to Dutch grammatically anyway. My dad was fluent in French, and he also started speaking to me in French as well, and then kind of French exchange visits. We have some really good friends in France, so we started traveling to France too.
Okay. What was your father's job?
My dad had many jobs. He had a lot of jobs, from being a teacher, a carpenter. He created a lot of the furniture in our home, beautifully created. I couldn't believe it when he told me he'd made this furniture.
They still,
as I was
do they still live in the? Do they still live in the same home?
Yeah, it's always been the same home.
Okay.
Actually. Yes, our beautiful family home. And what else? His main job actually was a composer. He was a songwriter. Yes, and he, in his lifetime, I'm very proud to say, he wrote about 2,000 songs. He's published in America, and yeah, he had more success in America than he did in the UK on the country scene. But ironically, he'd never travelled to America, so that's something that I hope to bring forward for him.
Have you been?
I have. I lived in America briefly, actually, in Florida, but yes, I've travelled in various parts of America, yeah, on both sides of the coast at least.
Your mother, what did she do?
Well, she was basically very traditional, actually, a housewife in my lifetime, actually. And she's also a creative in her own way. They're both very, very creative, both left-handed. I think that it's very interesting. I'm right-handed, but it's kind of interesting, isn't it?
It is. But I hear that most creatives are left-handed.
Yes, yes.
They are.
My mum, prior to getting married and me coming along 2 years later, she worked in operations at KLM Airport.
Okay.
So that was her job. She was ground staff. Yeah.
Right. So your father wrote music. Did he play any instruments?
Yes, he was a guitarist. Yeah, singer-songwriter.
Acoustic?
Yes, yes. So I was surrounded by music, which has influenced me majorly. Yeah, yeah.
Did you ever want to have siblings?
It's something that people often ask me, but I never knew anything different. So I just had my life, you know.
Well, your parents were very close with you.
Yes,
They spent a lot of time with you, so you didn't have any time to want to have someone else with you.
It is. I think it can get lonely being an only child.
Did it?
Well, later in life, you kind of realise that most people have siblings. Most people, I don't know what the statistics on that are, but it's an interesting dynamic. I think there are definitely advantages and disadvantages, but then when a parent passes away, I think that's when it really hits you as an only child. There isn't a sibling to share that with. And that is one thing that I do wish I had siblings for in that regard.
What about cousins?
Yes, I have cousins around the world, mainly in Holland, Belgium and the UK.
Okay, so your father's side, not so many?
A few cousins, yeah. We're certainly on very different paths because they're very kind of more local people, kind of their own businesses and things like that.
Are they same age range?
No, I'm the youngest on both sides of my family.
Okay.
Quite a bit younger actually, so I'm kind of an anomaly in our family actually, come to think of it.
So I guess with some of your cousins, you may be the age of some of their kids.
Like not far off.
Not far off.
Yeah, about 10 years
so
difference. I'm kind of in between, yes.
Oh, that's interesting. So did you take many trips to Holland when you were young?
Yeah, I spent all of my childhood summers in Holland. I was actually rarely in the UK for a summer until I was about 15 or 16, and you know, was kind of branching off and doing my own thing, and then university, etc.
So do you spend a lot of time with your grandparents?
I did, my Dutch grandparents, and even recently I've been really reflecting on them. You know, all of my grandparents have now passed.
I see.
I lost my grandmothers in 2016 within months, which was odd. But yeah, like beautiful figures in my life. Yeah.
That is so interesting. So what were you like at school? How do you picture yourself in your elementary school days, middle school? You said you really loved academics.
Yes.
As a child, so you weren't very sports-minded, but you still had to participate in some sports.
Oh yes,
So
tennis. I love tennis.
Okay.
And it's kind of connected, but not intentionally. I was actually named after Gabriella Sabatini, the Argentinian tennis player in the 80s.
Okay, yes.
And she was at the height of her career then. And
Well, your parents were really into tennis then.
yeah, and they would watch it. I'm a summer child, so I was born on the 1st of July,
Okay.
and they happened to be watching Wimbledon. Apparently they almost called me Samantha. I know this story well, they've told me many times, but they settled on Gabriella. They really liked it. Yes, and then Wincy comes from Wincy Willis, my middle name, which is after Wincy Willis, the weather presenter. A famous weather presenter in the UK, at least.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So you're blanking now.
Yes. No, of course I wouldn't know her. No.
Yes.
She's in the UK.
Yeah, in the 80s, and it's kind of interesting, to be honest, because I went on to do presenting work later in my life, and you know, sometimes these names, they have a kind of mantra to them. They have a power to them. I feel.
You started to find your passion was reading, academics.
Yeah.
So what'd you do when you got into high school? What were you really focused on?
Well, at that point, early high school, secondary school as we call it in the UK,
Yes.
I was, one thing I was going to mention as well, also connected to that time, so around about 10, 11, I was, it's kind of from the cassette generation.
You were what?
From the cassette generation, recording-wise.
Okay.
I used to love interviewing people, and like early secondary school, I literally always had my parents, my dad being a musician as well, always had a cassette player nearby, and he would like strum out a tune and compose something just off the bat. He was writing songs daily, hence why he has such a catalogue of songs. But anyway, there was always a cassette player nearby. My mum would sometimes have a cassette player in Holland to record kind of memories and just kind of my development. There was always that kind of you know, like the highlights, recording the highlights kind of thing. So I was very kind of, it was part of my furniture, if you will, having a cassette player. And I used to start doing, just naturally, I don't know where this came from, I started doing interviews, and I used to get my friends involved. Okay, let's play the role, like I'm the interviewer, you're the celebrity. And I would do this. I also used to do teaching, like I wanted my parents, I wanted to show my parents that I was an academic. So I would be like, okay, I'm going to create a classroom. And this was from a very young age. And I remember...
Would you say like 8, 9?
Yeah, like, yes, like
Really?
even a little younger, like 6, 7. And I remember writing this in a diary, like we used to do a Monday diary in primary school. And I used to write this in a diary, like, what did you do over the weekend? Well, I played teachers. And my primary school teacher was like, what do you mean? Like, and she actually brought my parents in. I think she was a little bit like confused, and she actually really wanted to know what that meant.
She thought something was a little wrong. So it wasn't a good thing. She thought, okie dokie. We said a little confused. She thought, okay, this one flew over something.
Right.
Yes.
So,
okay.
Yeah, and my parents were like, yeah, like she wants to be a teacher. I think that's what it is. And they're like, well, this is brilliant. So they then obviously nurtured that, but they said it was highly unusual, which it kind of is. It kind of is weird. But what's so beautiful about my parents, my dad especially, is he just played along. He was an academic, and he would be writing the essays, and he would be like, will you mark this? It's beautiful, isn't it? I still have so much work that he did, homework and things. And we did all kinds of things. Galileo, I was into all of the world history, and I really wanted to create. He made it
fun for you.
He did. And then my dad used to create quizzes. He used to do like a 20-question quiz, and then, you know, so I was very blessed. I was surrounded by stimuli of all this academic stuff. Yeah.
So it gave you an innate curiosity all of us have.
Yes.
But he fed it.
He really nurtured it.
Did he ever teach other people?
Yeah, he was a born teacher for sure. And my dad actually, he used to work in an approved school, and he used to work with kind of very serious delinquent cases, you know, like we're talking serious cases here, and he really nurtured those boys. And I think one of this was before I was born, I think it would have been the 70s. And he used to tell me stories growing up of how there is so much good in everyone. And for example, my dad had a horse, which I didn't grow up with horses. I was allergic to them, not so much now, but before I was born, he had a horse, and he was kind of well known in the community for that too. But he used to take the horse, or I think he used to take the delinquents to the stables or something, and he used to kind of just take them out of their comfort zone, take them out of the detention centre, and he just really wanted to do some good. And he said he saw them just blossom, just out horse riding, and he said he saw them as just pure human beings.
That's beautiful.
It is.
That is so nice.
It is, yeah. So that's another one of my dad's jobs. I've forgotten what your original question was.
No, it doesn't matter because we're going to go into your high school now.
Yeah.
When you're starting to formulate what you want to do when you get into uni.
Yes, so I realised pretty early on that languages was my thing, that I would ace in languages. I was a straight A student, but languages I would get the A stars in. And my dad especially always wanted me to work in Brussels or somewhere. And I kind of resisted that dream, you know, but I think I fulfilled it in other ways, you know, I met the expectations. But at the same time, I knew I wanted to be perhaps a doctor of languages or something like that.
So where did it go? Where did you?
Well,
how was uni for you? You spent 4 years, or
I did. So I took my sixth form, the A levels, which is like a 2-year thing in the UK, and then I tried to take on chemistry. And that was a little too much. I wanted to be like an international chemist or something using languages because I loved chemistry at GCSE. But at A level, it became so intense doing all of this that I decided to focus on languages. And then that brought me to uni, and I kind of continued those subjects. I did French, German and linguistics. And then me being me, it wasn't enough. So I took on a 4th major. And I'm actually one of the only people in the UK to graduate in 4 majors. Yes.
In 4 years?
Simultaneously, yes. So I kind of did that, and then
So what was the 4th major?
It was art history.
Art history?
Yes, and then to kill kind of 3-4 birds with one stone, I used to read the art history books, the French and German versions, so that I could keep my language skills up while applying it to a subject. And that's how I got through.
Were you living at home while you were in uni?
No, I moved out when I was 18. I was determined to be independent, yeah.
Now tell me, what are the majors in? I mean, you have 4 degrees in what?
French, German, linguistics, and history of art.
My goodness. What was your social life like?
It was pretty good. I was the president of an Oriental dance club actually at university, and I ended up stepping down because I really needed to focus on my academia. Yes, but the dance days were really fun.
Okay, so after you finished with all of it, graduating with 4 degrees, where did you start working? Or were you working prior to that?
I was working in the holiday periods actually at a genetics company of all places. I worked in a genetics company, and because they needed the language skills, and that was interesting because I was doing the modern languages, and my co-worker was also a Durham undergrad, and he was doing the Latin languages. So Greek and Latin he was doing. So kind of like the dead languages, and I had the modern languages. And somehow between us, when we were doing our training, we were not qualified scientists, but we had to do some kind of genetics training, and the language skills actually helped to decipher the scientific terms. So we could sometimes actually figure it out between us. You know, it was quite magic, really. His name was Damien, really good friend of mine.
He's still a good friend of yours?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we worked part-time together for a few years as undergrads, and then I went on to become a manager in that company, like a client manager, which was not planned, but they kind of handed me the job when I graduated, so that was amazing. And the recession happened, 2008. The recession happened, the Lehman crash.
The Lehman shock,
that changed everything. I was made redundant. I was like, oh my goodness, you know, what do I do? But that was actually the real birth of my my careers to date, because I became an international journalist. A local friend of mine who's a royalist, she's quite famous in the British media, Anita Atkinson, who I'd done my work experience with when I was 14. That's where I started assistant editing, and we're 2 of a kind, Anita and I. But she kind of took me under her wing as a graduate, a fresh graduate, and said, why don't you try journalism? You've always been really good at writing. And I already had published poetry, again, coming from my dad also has that. We went on this kind of journalistic mission together, Anita and I became a freelance journalist from 2009 onwards. Someone also handed me a camera at a festival, and I really took to photography. So I was on a new journey there. became an architectural photographer for the British government, kind of urban development planning. So that was like a 6-month contract. And then I was off on my American venture, my American dream.
Well, now, how long had you done that before you went off to your American dream?
I would say about 18 months.
So then you went off to America after that?
I did, yes. I had a lot of contacts in America as a
Didn't they want you to stay? Wait, weren't you considered pretty valuable with all of your resources
in
and
Europe,
the knowledge that you had?
certainly.
So how were you able to leave?
It's the biggest irony of my life. Yes. Also, how I ended up in Japan is the biggest irony of my life.
Okay, well, explain it to me.
Yes, actually, it's right during that phase. When I was doing the international journalism in the UK, I was just at a local, I think it was a European Parliament. It was like a local festival in the UK, in Durham, Durham City. It was in I'm trying to remember, it was the town hall, and I stumbled upon, it was Europe-based, European theme. There was a table of Japanese students from a Japanese college liaised with my university, and it was just something about the mysticism of it. I don't know what it was, but I was drawn to this table. They were drawn to me. They beckoned me to come over, and they said, "We want to teach you shodo, Japanese calligraphy." So they started writing my name in Japanese, and it was so stunning, you know, that I just picked up a brush, and they were like, "Hey, you're really good at that. Come on, let's learn Japanese."
Okay.
And you know, friendships were born, and from then on, I had this Japanese connection thing running in the background. But I was still going to move to America.
But you're still doing your journalism.
Yes, yeah.
All right, so I still want to know how you were able to separate. There are people that are trusting you, believing you're going to bring the work in.
Yeah.
Now you said 18 months, then you decided to leave, so you had to let them know prior to that.
Let who know?
Let the people that you're working with. You're journalists, though, but they're expecting work from you.
Oh yes, yeah.
So how did you get out of that?
Well, freelance. I was more or less my own boss in that sense. Yeah.
So you didn't have anybody really depending on your work.
No, I was literally.
If you brought in something they wanted, sometimes you'd bring in stuff they didn't want.
I was pitching. I was a young journalist. I was fresh in the industry, so I was pitching my stories to newspapers.
I understand. So they wouldn't take it all the time.
Yeah. Here's what I used to do. Actually, I used to call about 10 newspapers with a story that I'd written overnight. It was usually connected to some art history story, connected to the BBC. I had a lot of friends in the BBC at the time, and I still do. But I used to call about 10 newspapers, and one of them would get published. Okay. And I built up my portfolio that way.
So it was really easy for you to leave.
It was. It wasn't too committal.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm thinking that you said the woman that took you under her wing. Wasn't she a journalist as well?
Yes, yeah.
So you weren't doing, I thought you were doing a lot of stuff with her, or you guys were doing this together?
I had a column in her local paper.
Right.
I had a
so
column.
she had a regular job?
She did, yes.
Right.
And I was kind of her assistant slash columnist. Yeah.
Okay. But still, she understood with the freelance nature of what you did that it's hit or miss. She can't guarantee anything to you.
That's right.
Vice versa. I see what you're saying.
It's a key point, actually. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it because she was sad to see me leave, of course.
I understand, but there's stuff that she says she can't help you to stay.
She knew I had wings, and she always supported that. Yeah, she was also a school governor, so she was always there in the background, kind of a woman of many talents, actually.
I see. As you are, as you've become. I guess birds of a feather, they say.
That's it. That's the thing.
So you go to the States. You go to the States knowing you're going to do what?
Photography. I threw myself into a lot of photography workshops.
But you knew before. Tell me, you went there. Not blindly, you already had something set up?
I had friends and contacts there, yes, I did.
So what were you supposed to be doing when you got there? And what state was it?
I was in Florida. Excuse me. I was also in Las Vegas for some conferences. Yeah.
I bet you were. No, I'm just kidding. That's a beautiful place.
Yes, yeah.
It is.
It was a short stint of about 6 months, actually. Okay. Short stint, and I was back to the UK again because there was this calling to go to Japan. I don't know what it was, but there was a strong calling to go to Japan.
Now you met these Japanese students in the UK.
Yeah.
That taught you little calligraphy.
That's right.
Okay. Then you left, went to the States for about a 6-month stint.
Yeah.
Now they were still in the UK?
I think
they had probably gone back. They'd gone back because they were on a short stint too.
That's right. And they would send me pictures from Tokyo, Yokohama, and they were like, "Why don't you come and visit? See how you like it. We think you'd be a great teacher."
Now they're telling you this while you're in the States?
Yeah. Okay. So it was a calling, and I loved the States, actually. I still love the States, but there was something about Japan that was calling me, something about the Orient, you know, the mysticism. I don't know what it was. Spirituality too.
What year is this?
And their kindness. It would have been 2011 at that point.
That's quite a ways away. Wait.
Yeah.
From the Lehman shock, because the Lehman shock happened around 2008, 2009, right?
Yes.
Something like that.
I was working online as a French teacher, making French videos, French language learning videos, and that was a key turning point. As I was back at my parents for a little bit,
Okay.
and I started learning Japanese online. I really wanted to get this down.
Now, when is this? I'm trying to fit this in. Was this between your becoming a freelance journalist?
Yeah, so we're going now to about 2011.
Okay.
And 2011, 2012. Then I had a job in Germany, which was incredible. I worked at a banking academy, and this was through a friend of mine, a kind of a Durham grad, and she was working for someone in Austria. That led to something in Germany, and I was working at a banking academy with people from all around the globe. And that really was an eye-opener for me, teaching English literature to all of these different people, and just starting to realise the power of English language, actually, and how lucky we are as natives, and how I should really utilise that. But ironic too, because I have all of these other languages, which I feel I'm kind of maybe more applying what I've worked so hard to become fluent in. You know, English kind of, one could argue, could be like an easier route in a sense,
Yes.
but I still work very hard in that industry.
Okay. How long were you in Germany?
I was only there for about 3 months at
Okay,
that
3
academy.
months.
They were very intensive courses, so I
Now,
ran.
this is prior to the U.S.
And this was after the US. So I
Okay,
come
when
back,
you came back, you come back, okay.
Yeah, it's like a springing board, coming back to my parents' place, and then off to Germany, and then the Japanese calling was still going on.
All right.
Yeah, and I finally moved in 2013.
To Japan.
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
I went to, well, in 2011 I went to Yokohama, made a
Wait,
documentary.
Okay, wait.
I'm going back and
Oh,
forth.
you are. But that's okay. That's how life is. 2011, you're still in England, but you came here just for a short visit in 2011.
Yeah.
All right.
It was the year, I remember this, the year that Kate and William got married. It was the April I was back. So they got married. I remember watching the royal wedding on TV with my parents, and it's always such a prominent occasion. This is like kind of how my British mind works. It's the British timeline. It's how we kind of remember things. Right. Yeah. 6 months after the earthquake, it was October time. I wanted to be here for the autumn, for the fall. And I was too early for the autumn because it doesn't come until later, I found out, but it was still very, very hot. And also I started experiencing tremors for the first time, which
in
is
your life.
A life changer.
My
Yeah.
goodness.
The first one is very frightening. And
for
then,
you,
I was shaking for a leaf, even though my brain was saying, it's fine, you're safe, you're with your friends. I was literally like on edge.
I can imagine, yeah.
Because they were pretty big aftershocks.
All the time.
You remember them?
Well, I was born in California and I was raised there.
Right,
so we always had them, and I was in the big earthquake we had in California in 1970, I believe it was, when the Veterans Hospital collapsed and many of the freeways were damaged. And coming here, it was just, they've never bothered me. They did as a little kid until I started to understand that there was nothing I could really do about it other than take care of myself.
Yeah.
And California was always falling into the ocean.
Yes.
You know, San Andreas Fault is supposed to crack completely. California is supposed to slide into the ocean. So I grew up with that fear all my elementary years, you know, through elementary. Because after that time, I stopped being afraid. Because I asked my older brother, I think I was maybe in the 5th grade, and it was supposed to happen that day. And I said, what would you do if California fell in the ocean? And he said, swim. I thought, yes, that makes sense.
Survival skills.
And I thought, and from that point on, I was never afraid anymore. Because I figured whatever happens, I'm going to have a reaction to it.
Yes.
So let me just do whatever I can do for whoever I can do it for while I'm there.
Right.
And not worry about it.
Yeah.
So I was here when we had the March 11th earthquake. So you came here during that time for a short time, and then from there you went back to England, but now you have the bug.
Circling back though, there is something I want to add there about the earthquake. I did get a job offer before the earthquake. It was about a couple of months before the earthquake to start in March, and it was in the Fukushima area, and something came over me that said, no, you're not doing it. And I was thinking to myself, where is this coming from? And I thought, no, it's my intuition's telling me something isn't right. It's weird. That's all I wanted to add there.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. We have.
Okay, so when you went back, we do, all of us do. If we listen to it, I think we're all in tune. If we learn to listen to it, because we're just a source of energy.
Yes, that's right.
I don't know, some people really get attached to what we call our body or whatever, and some of us are attached to it, but still understand there's something else.
We are a vibrational field. I
Most
do
definitely.
I study this a lot now. Is the light and the sound? These two fundamental things. That's all we are. Is that's light and sound.
There you go. So you went to England, then you came back.
Came back, went on to Germany, went back to England again for a number of weeks, and I was studying Japanese at the time online. And then I noticed that this company is one of the biggest online ones, Innovative Language Learning. You've probably heard of it, Japanese Pod 101, that company. They ended up recruiting me, believe it or not. I saw an advertisement for a job. I was planning on applying to university work here, or some kind of English teaching, or even French teaching work, something, the mainstream kind of languages here. And something happened. I don't know what happened, but I saw this job advertisement and I was like, that is me. It was a product management position in the company. They said, you're studying with us, but we're also recruiting. Would you like to apply? So I applied. I stayed up all night. I knew this was a very important application. It was a job I wanted, and I got the job. And it was a kind of detour to what I'm doing now, which I work in a university, prestigious university here now. But yeah, first I needed to do my broadcasting. That's what the divine had planned for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you did?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So how long did you work with Pod 101?
I was there for 18 months, working very intensively as a manager, and then in front of the camera too. I was doing.
They brought you here to Japan?
They did. They did. Yes, I was already booked to come here as a tourist. So they recommended that I just come here and sort it out later. They said we'll maybe send you to Korea if you need to change your visa. They do that, right? They didn't need to send me to Korea as it happens, but we got all of that sorted out. Yeah. So I kind of started working.
So how long have you been in Japan now?
So yeah, like I've had my base here since that time. I've been in and out of the country too. My true base is the UK actually, but yeah, I'm not a permanent resident here or anything.
So when did you come here, 2011?
Yeah, visiting, and then 2013 the second time as a tourist.
Okay.
And I just ended up kind of staying here for the majority of the time.
So you've been here 10 years now?
Yeah, coming up to that, yeah.
10 years, okay.
But yeah, like I say, not a straightforward journey. I was in and out of the country. I was back in America as well.
You were back in America doing what?
Okay, so I did the broadcasting job for about 18 months. I did the Dutch Holidays show and a lot of script supervision. Was working behind the camera in the studio, and then also ended up as a kind of script supervisor, and then ended up back in front of the camera as well, which is kind of where I'm also quite comfortable these days. And that show went on to date to have about 2 billion views online.
What's the name of the show? It's
Dutch Holidays and a variety of other shows. They have over 40 languages now, the company, and I'm kind of the face of a lot of that.
And you're still doing this?
Yeah, I mean it's a perpetuating thing. They still have me presenting. We did so much recording that I have enough material to kind of keep going for eternity, I think. So that's and counting, 2 billion and counting. Yeah, I believe I don't often tell people this, but I believe I'm the most watched multilingual face online, whatever that means. It's all relative, but it's kind of wild, right?
Oh, that is wonderful. Okay, so that's where you are now.
Yeah. So that's kind of its own kind of what's the word? It just perpetuates that.
Perpetual.
Yeah, perpetual. Yeah. Yes, I went to the UN. And this is a funny story. I was teaching as a freelance teacher here in the corporate industry, you know, kind of hopping from company to company. What's it called? Just an on-location teacher, like a business teacher, similar to what I was doing at the academy in Germany, the banking thing, hopping around different banks. And you know, as anyone who's worked in that industry before, you meet some very interesting people, movers and shakers and such. And there was one particularly lovely client who was very, very humble. He was also a northerner. He was from Armoury Prefecture, and I was teaching him. He was some kind of government worker. That's all I knew. He was very, very humble about his position.
Now you're teaching him English?
Yeah, so
Yes,
they wanted me to cover some a little bit different, some topics, the media and the news, and I wasn't quite sure why, but then he said, actually, I'm going to the UN. I'm going to do a 3-year placement at the UN headquarters in New York. So I'm like, okay, this is quite a big deal.
As what?
He said, what was it he said? It was like, he gave it a general title, a very general title, you know, a little vague. He was like, it's some kind of secretary position. I was like, okay, that's interesting. He said, in fact, he was like, my wife's pregnant with our first child. The child will be born in the States. He was like, why don't you come and visit us when the child's born? We would love to have you. So I end up on this plane. It's a crazy story. I end up on this plane to New York. I get diverted, and that's a whole nother story, but I got there in the end, and my plane was delayed. I had to get another, the connection didn't work out. And he was an ambassador, I didn't realise, but he was an ambassador. He was actually the second secretary for Japan.
I see.
And he was just so humble, I think, that he almost was a little shy to tell me of his position. And I got the invitation letter actually just a few days before. I had a little visa complication actually, but I managed to get in. It was only because he sent that letter. He had to invite me officially. So he picked me up in the taxi, and because the flight had been delayed, it actually worked out perfectly because I saw the New York skyline just on the bump of the hill. I could just see it in front of me. And it was magical, you know. We Brits, we dream of this stuff. It's like the stuff of movies, you know.
When you're living in grey skies all the time,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you get to see, this is very English, the weather we have today.
Yes, it is.
It is. Gabriella, because of time, I'm going to end you here, and we are going to come back again for sure.
Okay.
There's no doubt about it. But before I end, I always have a question I like to ask my guests. If you could magically go back in time and meet the younger Gabriella, and give her advice.
Yeah.
How old would you be, and what advice would you give her?
Oh, that's a great question. Maybe back to my 5-year-old self. I would say the beginning of my school years, and I would probably say the cosmos is inside of you, and it's a big deal, and you can tap into that anytime you want, and you can manifest whatever you want. Because I didn't know that at the time, but I know that now. So
that is so beautiful. Thank you so much, Gabriella.
Thank you, Lance. Pleasure.
I want to thank all of you for watching this podcast. Make sure you press like and subscribe. And never forget, it's all unknown, so continue to reach for the stars.
Because you're too blessed to be stressed.